Chapter 23 Face to Face. Sota bounded down to the armory, Chief of the Watch Zhao Hui panting as she tried to keep pace with him. Axiom monitored their progress, calling out threats, friendlies, and dangers along the way. Destican Squad, 50 meters ahead on your right, Axiom told the pair. Shelter in the room to your left. I am redirecting friendlies to your position. Sota pushed Zhao Hui into an adjoining room. They drew their pistols and listened to the shuffling of feet. Sota aimed his pistol at the wall. "What are you doing?" Zhao Hui hissed at him. "A little something I learned in Singapore," Sota replied. "People seem to forget all the time that mag weapons can punch through solid metal." Outside in the corridor, there was a sudden outburst of shouting and gunfire. A team of UN Marines had ambushed the enemy boarding party. As gunfire raged in the hallway, Sota raised his pistol and started shooting. The sounds of the blasts echoed through the tiny mechanic's closet, causing Zhao Hui to shriek and put her hands to her ears. "Sorry, but I need a bigger gun," Sota replied. There was a thump as a Destican soldier collapsed against the doorway just outside the little room where Sota and Zhao Hui were hiding. Sota stuck his arm through the gap and retrieved a long and wicked-looking firearm. "So, this must be what passes for a rifle on Decronia," Sota said, examining the weapon. "Don't even try it," Zhao Hui said. "Anything could go wrong when you try to shoot an alien weapon." "Not my first time stealing a gun," Sota remarked. He handled the weapon deftly, searching for anything that might resemble the anti-thief countermeasures commonly found on law enforcement weapons in Singapore. "I think this weapon is key to his handprint or some other biomarker," Sota remarked, pointing at a smooth surface on the hand grip. "That means we can't use it," Zhao Hui said. "Oh, on the contrary, it means we have to use it in other ways," Sota said. "Follow me. We're going to link up with those Marines. Axiom, tell the friendlies we're coming to them." 50 meters down the hall, a group of Marines were pressing the attack. Ashok Raval could barely hear his helmet-mounted radio over the sounds of gunfire. He took shelter behind a corner and said, "Last calling station, this is Raval. Send your traffic again." "Raval, this is Axiom. Lift your fire. Friendlies coming towards you, attacking the enemy from behind." Ashok cursed. He resented taking orders from AI, but this was something he could not afford to ignore. He held down the talk button on the front of his pressure suit and sent a message to his squad. "Marines, lift fire! Friendlies at our front!" 2 Destican soldiers noticed the Marines break off their assault and broke cover, trying to chase them. That was when Sota and Zhao Hui attacked from behind. The Chief of the Watch shot the enemies in the back with her pistol, but their combat armor absorbed the impact force. The 2 soldiers were distracted and started to turn around, lowering their weapons in confusion. Before they could properly react, Sota charged their position and swung the stolen rifle like a club. The first Destican was hit so hard one of his horns snapped, making a horrible cracking sound as though bones were breaking. The second Destican was dispatched by Ashok, who ran full tilt to reach Sota and Zhao Hui. "There's no time to rest. There's more of them close by," Ashok said. He passed a spare SMG to Zhao Hui. "What's the situation?" Sota asked. "It's a much bigger boarding party than last time around," Ashok said. "Hostiles could number as high as 500, and they're more focused on taking the ship than kidnapping people." "Have we lost any critical systems or stations?" "The starboard ECM emitter, a munitions plant, 2 of the autocannons, the hydroponics bay, the main fabricator, and the auxiliary water reclaimer," Ashok said. "We've heard there was a team of Desticans trying to get into the brig. That's where we're headed." "Oh, fuck the Marauders," Sota said. "All right, is there anything left in the armory?" "No, sir, we've cleaned it out." "Good," Sota replied. "Lead the way and we'll lend a hand. Axiom, do you still have control over the ship's climate systems?" "Negative," the AI replied. "I will remedy that at once." Up on the bridge, Ino looked around. She was expecting Iraj to appear on the bridge, to taunt her like he had done in the past, but so far he was breaking from the norm. She turned her attention back to the sensors manager. Now that the bridge was barricaded and the Marines focused on fighting off the boarding party, Ino had a moment to think. Both Kailasha and its escorts had turned to flee as soon as the boarding action started, using their cloaking devices to escape from Marathon's weapons fire. Ino recognized this tactic. Araj was waiting for his boarding parties to seize control of the Marathon, refusing to engage in ship-to-ship combat while his own forces were aboard. "Captain, we found the 5th Destican warship," said Petty Officer Mancini. "Where is it?" Ino asked. "Low orbit, Sanctuary Moon," Mancini replied. "It's launching breaching pods at the vivarium." "Shit!" Ino cried out. "Can we take them out?" "Not from here. We're too far away," Mancini said. "What about Kelly's wolf pack?" Ino asked. "How long until the starfighters can engage?" "Distance to target is about 400,000 kilometers," said Navigator Raha. "It's gonna be close." On the vivarium, Azaryn looked up from her work and saw the new sensor contacts on her screen. "We're about to be boarded," Azaryn said. "Keep the Desticans away from my station. I must continue to work." Reza took command of the Marine detachment. "Helmets on, everyone. We're going to seal off the control room and—" "What?" "Is someone shooting at us?" said Jaiho Yuhan, pointing at the sensor display. A barrage of ground-to-space missiles rose out of the atmosphere, streaking towards the vivarium. "What the hell?" Reza gasped. "Everyone brace for impact!" 2 of the GTS missiles shot past vivarium and detonated their warheads in open space. Intense nuclear fireballs caused everyone to shut their eyes for a moment. Delegate looked down at the sensor readout. "The enemy breaching pods appear to have been disabled," Delegate reported. "They have stopped firing their maneuvering thrusters. A majority of the pods are going to miss vivarium. 2 are still on track to impact." "Marines, lock and load," Reza said. "Get ready for a fight." Azaryn pointed to her sensor display. "Is that how those weapons are supposed to work?" Reza, distracted, peered over her shoulder. 12 ground-to-space weapons had matched velocity with vivarium, orbiting the moon alongside Azaryn's ship. The missiles had assumed a sphere-shaped escort formation. A few moments later, 2 breaching pods impacted the vivarium. Delegate had guessed correctly. The nuclear blast from the first 2 missiles had disabled the pods. When they reached vivarium, the pods failed to activate their retro thrusters and grappling hooks. Instead of gently attaching themselves to the ship, the 2 breaching pods crashed at high velocity, shattering into millions of tiny shrapnel pieces. The remaining pods missed vivarium outright and sailed off into deep space. "Hell yeah!" shouted one of the Marines. "We're not out of the woods yet," Reza said. "Here comes the enemy frigate." A lone Destican frigate loomed out of the darkness of space, closing on vivarium. "Not yet! I still have 29 torpedoes to guide!" Azaryn gasped. As if in answer to her plea, 2 of the escort missiles suddenly fired the maneuvering thrusters and broke out of formation, charging toward the Destican frigate at full burn. The enemy launched countermeasures and veered off, trying to evade. "Someone down on the surface must like us," Reza commented. Hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, a MiG-95 squadron raced toward vivarium. In the cockpit of the lead fighter, squadron leader Dylan Kelly clenched his thighs and tried to whistle. He was being pressed into his seat by intense G-forces and was doing everything to avoid passing out. "Danger," the ship's flight computer spoke in his headset. "High G-forces. Reduce acceleration to avoid injury." "Are we in range yet?" Dylan called out. "Not yet, sir," his wingman called back. Dylan pushed the throttle and his starfighter accelerated more aggressively. "You're going to fly apart, sir," the wingman protested. "I'll fly apart then," Dylan snapped. "Computer, time to weapons range." 42 minutes, 30 seconds. Deceleration burn recommended. Dylan ignored the warning. He punched a small red button on the left side of the cockpit. "Error," the computer replied. Insufficient waiting period between doses. Risk of overdose. Risk of toxic buildup. Captain, are you trying to juice yourself again? A wingman called out. If we don't do it now, there won't be a next time, Dylan responded. Computer, emergency override. Authorization, Squadron Leader Kelly. Dylan, UNAF 122122012. Acceleration cocktail deploying, the computer said. Oh, yeah! Here comes the juice, Dylan said loudly. He felt a sharp prick in his shoulders, followed by a rushing sensation as a cocktail of blood thinners, adrenaline, amphetamines, stimulants, and other potent combat drugs were pushed into his system. Dylan pushed his MiG-95 to the limits of human endurance, determined to reach Vivarium before it was too late. 5.9 Gs, the computer said. 5.91 Gs. 5.92 Gs. Meanwhile, back on the Marathon, Ino was forced to stop paying attention to Vivarium. Captain, the Kailasha is moving toward the Caravaneer slave ship, Prispin called up from the CIC. Wait, you mean the one that had a revolt on board? Ino asked. Where is it? A shudder ran through the floor, and Ino cast a wary eye at the barricaded entrance. About 200,000 kilometers distant, Prispin replied, but they're not closing on us anymore. The ship is behaving erratically. It's like there's no one at the helm. Or there's fighting on the bridge, Ino said to herself. Ino was frustrated. Originally, she had planned to defeat the enemy in detail, fighting the Desticans in smaller groups rather than all at once. This plan was now coming apart at the seams. An enemy boarding party was loose on her ship. Her starfighter squadrons were unsupported, and her command team was scattered. She took a deep breath and started to improvise. Helm, put us on an intercept course with the Caravaneer slave ship. Put us right behind Kailasha if you have to. Mancini, find that escort ship that was with Sylvalin's vessel. We can't afford to lose track of it now. I think I already have him, Mancini replied while Yamada worked the helm. Sensors are detecting heat emissions consistent with a cloaking device. Call the VWAX ships and have them narrow down his position, Ino said. Then she tapped a command into one of the computers behind the electronic warfare station. Axiom, give me an update on the enemy boarding parties. Situation remains critical, Axiom replied. Enemy forces reported in the Guardian Point Defense System, Hangar 2, Impulse Thrusters, Starboard Cloaking Sail, and Heavy Water Reclaimer. They are attempting to breach the brig, Redundant Life Support, Antimatter Reactor, and CIC. I have also... Axiom paused. It was so out of character for the AI to be taken aback that everyone on the bridge looked around nervously. Apologies, Captain. There has been a development. What? Ino said. What happened? The diversion I prepared was successful, Axiom said. Please stand by. I am alerting the Quick Reaction Force. More than 20 decks below the bridge, there was a fierce gun battle playing out in the halls and corridors surrounding the brig. This time, a prisoner escape really had occurred. Destican soldiers found and released the marauders, meaning there was now an additional 90 hostiles to fight. Sota pushed several crew members through a bulkhead door, followed them, and sealed it behind himself. That's it, Axiom. We're all out, Sota said into his radio. Stand by. I am terminating life support in the designated areas, the AI replied. Enemy fatalities confirmed. Venting the zone to space now. Lieutenant Commander Beninato, there is a large squad of Desticans in the corridor adjacent to your position. They are moving around you and heading to another destination. You must not engage them. It is crucial that you let them pass. I say again, do not engage. What? Several crewmates called out. Sota, Xiaohui, and Ashok had expanded their group of fighters to almost 30 people, a mixed group of humans and Savanti. Sota shook his head. He had grown to trust Axiom's judgment. Everyone hide, he ordered. While Sota's large team worked to make themselves scarce, Sota found a hiding space next to a pile of wreckage where the ceiling had collapsed, revealing the deck above. Poking his rifle through a hole in the debris, Sota watched as a large squad of Destican soldiers moved past his position. In their midst was a group of prisoners, several humans and a few Savanti. Most of the prisoners looked battered and bloody. They had not given up without a fight, and the Destican soldiers chatted excitedly amongst themselves, as though they had reason to be happy. And then Sota saw her. Ino Esperanta was among the prisoners. She was shackled hand and foot, pulled along by a Destican soldier who was holding a fistful of her long blonde hair. Sota felt all the wind go out of him as he tightened his grip on his rifle. But before he could do anything, Sota felt a touch on his shoulder and heard a familiar voice. "Hold your fire." He looked around. Rylan Quinn and a handful of Savanti soldiers had appeared in the hallway behind him. They were wearing full-body power armor and carrying sinister-looking weapons. Rylan had some kind of visor over his eyes, but Sota got the impression he was making eye contact. Slowly, Rylan put a finger to his lips. "We're following this group," Rylan whispered. "Take your team and relieve Hangar 2. Liechtenstein needs help." Sota nodded and stood aside, allowing the Savanti infantry to continue stalking the invaders and their prisoners. At this stage of the battle, the Marathon and her allies only knew the location of 5 out of 6 Destican warships. Shaman Paranold felt very proud of himself for suggesting the hiding place of the 6th vessel. The Destican frigate Cyana was currently latched to the starboard side of Marathon's hull, having arrived there with the rest of the boarding parties. Cyana had landed on top of one of the Marathon's maneuvering thruster nodes, and after cutting through the armor and hull, Paranold had set up his temporary command center in the fuel pumping station that served said node. Paranold knew that taking control of the ship was a priority, but his master had made his own will abundantly clear. Should an opportunity arise, it must be seized. So the shaman had dispatched a specialist team with explicit orders to find and capture Ino Esperanta. He had waited here in the fuel station for about 20 minutes, listening to the reports of the battle and making decisions as a field commander in the meantime. Just when he was starting to worry that the boarding action was taking too long, that it might be better to cut his losses and retreat, the specialist team returned. "Wise one, we have captured the enemy commander," a Destican soldier reported. A group of human and Savanti prisoners were escorted into the room. All but one were made to stand aside while a blonde woman was thrown at Paranold's feet. "For a smaller human, she's damn heavy," a Destican soldier groaned. Ino looked up at him, shaking in fear. The shaman felt a sense of elation building up within him. He reached into the folds of his robes and produced a small crystal. It was a deep blue stone that resonated with psionic power. Clenching the psionic archive in his fist, Paranold began to focus inwardly. He had spent the better part of 50 years training in the art of psionics, acquiring and honing a skill that very few Desticans possessed. Even fewer now that the homeworld was destroyed. "Savage girl, you have fought like the Destican you will soon become," Shaman Paranold said to Ino. "Now I shall prepare you for the journey to meet your new master." Drawing power from the psionic archive, Shaman Paranold began projecting his thoughts, turning them into energy and force. He closed his eyes and spoke to the crystal. "Wise and noble Jabaksti, keeper of the psionic arts, lend me your skill and strength." The shaman opened his eyes and met Ino's gaze. He noted for just a moment that Ino's expression had shifted from fearful to defiant. unexpected for someone made powerless by both physical restraint and an unknowable power before them. Confident in his own mastery of psionics, in the power of the mind, Shaman Paranold decided to break down all current and future defiance in Ino's consciousness. Never again would she think about fighting or escaping from her master. She would be overwhelmed by the desire to serve. He reached out and enveloped Ino's body in telepathic energy. Then, in one overwhelming push, Paranold broke into her mind. For about a fraction of a second, Shaman Paranold knew that something had gone horribly wrong. Then, he knew nothing at all.
Destiny is hard to meet. It'll hunt you down somewhere along the way. Don't you see we're meant to be the prodigies that came to show the way? 'Cause I don't wanna rule the world alone. None of us can make it on our own. I'm screaming but I cannot hear a sound. The suffocation slowly comes around.